All right, we're back. We're a little late, but we're back. I had some minor technical difficulties this morning, but we're talking, it's COMP125, summer 2016, at Centennial, lesson 12. Lesson 12 is wrong. Lesson 13, I knew that was wrong. I'll update that in a second. Lesson 13 of our broadcast. You can see that I'm off today. So we're talking about the same things we talked about last week, which is about our banner ad. I've moved things to lesson 13. All I've done is I've duplicated right now lesson 12, the stuff we did from last week, lesson 12. I've moved it into lesson 13. And just to go over what we did, I'm just going to kind of put that up on GitHub for a second. So I'll go to GitHub, and I'll go to Centennial, and we'll create a new repository for this lesson. So this repository will be now lesson 13. And let's take this out here. And I'm just going to update my Git locally, so that way you have everything you need. Okay, so now we're up to speed. We have lesson 13 up online. One thing we have to change again is the README file. It's going to say lesson 13. We're also going to go and our home page is okay as a home page. All we have in here is right now one container, div tag with a container, and inside the container we have this. That's weird. We're missing the closing container. We are. That was a mistake. I guess we didn't fix that. We should have a closing container tag as well. I guess we didn't need it last week. So we have a canvas. Remember, HTML canvas we talked about before is just an element. And then inside the element we have, that's where our banner ad is going to be. But right, mine is 320 by 320. And if I was to run this thing, just to recap of what we did last week, right? So if I go to Light Server, I run it, it looks like this, right? Our hello world, right? So we did last week. Okay, so so this little hello world is kind of a cheesy little way of showing you how it works, right? But we're going to expand upon this. Obviously, moving text around is one thing. That was one of your requirements. But the other thing is adding in some images, and how do we do that? How do we do some simple animations and those kind of things? You have mostly everything you need, right, from a CreateJS perspective. But we're going to talk about all the things you can do with it. Okay, like how do I click on it? How does it respond as a button? There's many ways to do that. I can make it so that if I click on anywhere in here, it'll do something. I can also make it so that there's certain buttons to click inside of there, like create our own button. And we'll talk about that as well. All right, so let's just stop that for a second. So just a bit of administration we want to talk about for sure is, that next week we'll do a review on the Monday morning. All right, so whoever comes in, we'll do the review for the exam, and then what we'll do is on the Wednesday we'll have our exam from 12:30 to 2:30, and it'll just be again a bigger test with something you're going to build for the last day that probably will have to do something with CreateJS. I'm just telling you in advance. So and it'll be kind of hitting a bunch of stuff that we've already done, right? But it won't be that difficult. But I want to go over the stuff that we need to do for everything for the exam. We'll talk about it more next week on Monday. Yeah. Well, only the ones related to, stuff that we've learned with CreateJS. So, because remember, you're going to learn, if you learn CreateJS good enough, then you're going to use this API. Basically, it's like, how do I use an API with JavaScript? We've learned a bunch of things about JavaScript, and now we're using somebody else's vendor API, right? How do I do that? This vendor, CreateJS, people who made CreateJS, who actually was the people who made Flash, the same people who made CreateJS, right? So it's not like I just picked that random thing from the sky, right? It was Adobe actually sponsored, Adobe, the company who makes things like Photoshop and Flash and all those things. They sponsored a gentleman and his team, and a gentleman named Grant Skinner. I was going to bring it up just to guys give you a little bit of background on what this thing is. If I go Grant Skinner, he's a very popular person in the community. So he's got his own website, gskinner.com, right? So he's one of the guys, and his team made CreateJS, right? Which is very cool, and he's done all kinds of other stuff. He's very, big in the community in terms of the stuff he's done, and he's, like I said, he used to work for Adobe, right? So he's actually looks like out of Edmonton, Alberta, right? So that's pretty cool. But he's one of the, kind of what we've chosen here. And if you actually look at CreateJS, if I go to the CreateJS website for a second, CreateJS.com, right? Just a little bit of background about this stuff that you're using. If I go to blogs, right, the blog part of this, you can see that he also has a white paper on HTML5 banner ads with CreateJS. And this is where I'm basing this off of. Now, this is last year, October 5th, 2015, so it's not that old. But the white paper basically talks about how to create interactive advertising with CreateJS and HTML5, right? So that's why, I'm doing this stuff, so it's fairly recent. Is it the only way to do it? No. But you can make some ads. A banner ad would be what we're trying to do here with CreateJS. Okay, so that's where the idea came from. Again, I want you to think about CreateJS itself as just a suite of libraries, right, that have been pre-written for you in JavaScript, and all we're going to be doing is using them, right? So we're going to use the stuff that's already been created and understand how to put them in with our own code, so that way we can build a more interesting project than we've done so far, right? Okay, so that's really what we're doing from an administration perspective. So then Wednesday will be our last day of class, right? But Friday is the day, next Friday is when your project is due. Your little final assignment is due Friday, right? So please keep that in mind, right? So try and get it all done so we can have a nice, happy semester. And I think I've looked at some of your work over the weekend, which is good. The marks should be in. I want to get them all in by this week so you know how you're going into the exam for next week, right? So when you come into your exam next week, you should have all your marks, right? Which is what I want. I want you guys to understand where you're standing. Most of you, for the most part, the stuff that I've seen so far, it's okay. It's fairly good. I mean, there's some people who don't get it, but that's, but people who hand it in and don't get it still are going to come up with a pretty decent mark, believe it or not, right? Like I said, I'm not a difficult marker, and this is like an intro course. So it's not supposed to be a killer course where I come down on you, go, oh, you've made this wrong, and your style sucks, and blah, blah. It's not a style course. It's not about that, right? I'm not looking at you and saying, from a design perspective, you have to have everything perfect. If it's really ugly, I'll mention it. I will say this is kind of ugly, that kind of thing. But not because I want to make you mad or bring you down, but actually because you should know, if you compare the sites that are out there, if you ever have a doubt about what looks good or not, and sometimes the problem with us saying if it's good or not, it comes back to art, right? And this is not an art course, but if two people can look at a piece of art, one person could say, wow, that's beautiful. The other person say, wow, that's really ugly, right? I mean, it really depends on the person's eye, right? There's some best practices that people talk about these days. Like, for example, some people say, hey, don't make animated GIFs, right? I mean, some kind of weird animated GIF might be too old, right? Don't have music on your website. That sounds like retro 80s, right? Yes, you're right. But what if you're making a retro 80s website? Then would be okay, right? So, it really depends on what you're trying to build and the outcome, what you're looking for, what kind of user experience that you're talking about. And I also want you to keep in mind, we don't solve every problem with JavaScript, right? You can't do JavaScript without solid HTML5 and CSS3, HTML5 being your structure, CSS3 is your presentation, and finally your behavior is handled by JavaScript, right? So that's a real thing. Games, though, I'll be honest with you, when I make HTML5 games, I do them with pure JavaScript because of the control we have with games. Do you have to do it that way? No, but I find it's a lot easier that way. So we always try and tend to solve a problem with whatever presents ourselves to be easier, right? Okay, let's keep going. All right, so I've got this little project, and let's dissect it a little bit more. So to talk about what we've done here. Okay, so we've tried to handle it in a couple ways, and I'm kind of hitting it, at you in two things, right? We're talking about two things here. One of them is TypeScript, right? And remember, we talked about TypeScript being a superset of JavaScript. Now we have TypeScript here, and you can see that normally we don't have any typings. This is the type for the canvas. Canvas is a type is HTML element. So the TypeScript, what it's doing for us is just giving us additional information, code hinting, right? So that way we have less mistakes. That's what it's for. It's for us, right? I also set up using Command-Shift-B or Control-Shift-B on Windows machines. If I could click Control-Shift-B, I set up a way of transpiling between TypeScript, and if you notice the JavaScript file over here, here's the JavaScript, to JavaScript. This is the JavaScript version, right? And they look almost identical on this side. And the reason why they look identical, right, is because it's just TypeScript, is using JavaScript here. The only thing that I've done differently, and I did this really quickly last week, is broken my files. I split my files over, or split my code over a couple of files. So code splitting, right? When I did that, if you see what I've done, right, I have another folder called objects, and inside there I defined a label with what looks like a standard class, where I have my class is label. I use the extends keyword to extend the built-in CreateJS text object. That's from CreateJS, right? And then I have in the constructor function, that's what it is, I have a bunch of stuff that I do in the constructor function that we would normally do for every label we make, right? So if I want to make a label, I would probably do something like this, right? And I have this X and this Y as an example to handle the locations. Every object, when I use easel.js, so if I go back to the documentation, all we're looking at is easel.js, okay? There's 4 parts to CreateJS. We can't possibly get to all of them in the week that we have left, right? But I can introduce a lot more easel.js. So if I click at easel.js, again, we're just looking at an API, right? And if I go to docs, and if I look down at a standard object, like for example, the text object, if I look at text, this is the one we did, this is the text class. Notice that the text class has, we have to use a new keyword because text is a class that takes, the constructor of the text class takes 3 optional objects, 3 optional parameters. Hello world would be the string, some kind of font, and the font color. Those are the 3 things that are optional. And you can see, if I scroll down here, in the constructor definition here, you can see that text takes 3 objects as options. The square brackets tells us it's optional, right? You don't need to have it, right? And also, if you look at it from, if I go back here, and if I hover over certain things, like for example in my superclass, if I hover over the superclass of my label, which actually is a CreateJS text object, you can see that there's 3 optional objects: the text object, the font, and the color. Those 3 things are optional because they have the question mark next to them, right? Question mark means optional. Optional means that you may include it or may not include it. And it's a new way of doing, another way of doing type declarations for methods. So the constructor method has 3 optional parameters. Going back to the documentation, if I look at the index of each of these pages, so that one reason why I chose CreateJS is because it has really good documentation. You don't have to search around for trying to find what each of the things does. You can find out. So if I go to index, you can see if I look through here that properties, these are all the properties that this text object has built in, right? This text class. So if I look at X and Y, if I click X and Y, you can see that X is a number and it's inherited from the display object. So display object is like the superclass of the text class, right? If I click on display object, you can see it takes me to the superclass. Here's my display object class, right? And it extends something called event dispatcher. If you go back up the chain, right? So here's this is display object extends event dispatcher. Go to there. So event dispatcher is the super class of everything else. And it really talks about all of the methods that are built in. Add event listener, dispatch event, and all the stuff. On, off. These are different methods that it handles. And if I click on, it tells you that basically every class, because they all inherit from event dispatcher in the inheritance chain, has an on function. And the on function is an event listener, right? They make their own event listener with a bunch of, if you notice, optional components that come into play, right? So as you go down the inheritance chain, if I go back up again, 1 second. So if I go back to display object, So I click back. Here's display object. The display object class has all of these properties. So because all objects are part of the display object class, all objects in CreateJS are going to have these in Easel.js, right? All this stuff here, right? And they're also going to have all these methods, and they're also going to have all of these events, right? So it's a big class. When I use the text class, I actually have a lot of extra stuff that I may or may not want to use, right? Because of the inheritance chain, the way it works. I inherit all the objects from the other classes, right? That's nice. That's really, really nice. And it's big. It kind of gives you big, bulky objects to use, yes? But they are, because look, if this display object class is the superclass of, let me go back a couple of steps here, of the text class, that means the text class inherits everything from the display object class, which in turn inherits everything from the event dispatcher class, which is the super class, right, of this library, right? So that means that my text class has a lot of stuff inside of it that I can use. It's full. And you know what? When you use an API from a vendor, it's going to be like this. The vendor's API is going to have an inheritance chain, chances are, of some sort, and it's going to be, the class itself is going to have properties and methods that you can use, okay? It's just for us to understand how to use those properties and methods. And now you might say, Tom, do I really have to do this? Can I do this from scratch? Sure, do it from scratch. Lots of work, right? And you know what? If someone did it and it works, and it's open source and you can use it, then it might be a good idea to use someone else's stuff. Not by slapping it into your code, okay? This is not what I'm saying. Don't go, I want to do a scroller, some kind of page scroller, and you go up online and go page scroller, and then you find someone else's work, and you go, okay, cool, I'll just slap it in and it'll work, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about extending somebody else's work like we're doing here, all right? So let's take a look. So here I've extended the text object class, right, from CreateJS, and we've made the label class. That's what we're doing. This should be very familiar for you. This kind of syntax should be more familiar to you if you've done C# or Java or whatever, right? Okay, so now that we've done this, but this is what it emits. When I transpile from TypeScript to JavaScript, JavaScript looks a lot different. It looks like this, right? In this case, we have this little extends method, right? The extends method, what it does is basically it creates an illusion, I'll put it that way, of an inheritance, a classical inheritance chain in here. And it's very similar to that. I mean, if you notice what it does. So it says it creates a property, and if I was going to expand this thing, this is minified, right? So it's hard to see what this does, right? It's a minified function. But basically what it says that, when we take a property, what we're creating is another prototype. Here's we're still using prototypes, right? To create a prototype of the previous class. So all I'm saying is, hey, take your my label class or my text class, and we're creating something called label that is exactly like the text class, but we're also adding a bunch of other stuff in here. We're actually configuring the text class with our own label class to make it easy. Like that's what we're doing. And then going back to our app.ts, you can see that in here what we're doing is we are using the label class objects.label. We're assigning it to the hello label. We're describing it as a label. That's what we're doing here. And here we're creating a new object of the label class, the one we made, with the string of the name, the font, the color, and then our x and y coordinates, where is it's going to appear, and if it's centered or not. That was the other option. Notice we actually gave that option. We say, well, if the label is centered, that's one of the parameters we put into play, right? If it's centered is true. If it's true, then we set the registration mark, because each object starts with the top left corner being 0, 0. We set the registration mark into the middle of the object, right, by using a method that's built into the display object, which is getMeasuredWidth and getMeasuredHeight. We use that to measure how many pixels are in the object, multiply that 0.5, which is really divided by 2, and so we have the middle space of where this focal point is going to be, the middle of the object. And that means that if I was to show you more graphically, let's use Fireworks for a second. So I'm going to bring up Fireworks. So if I want you to, and I'm going to explain this a little bit more detail so you understand, because some people, you still may not get it. When I create an object, let me just make it the same size. So I'm going to say file. Yeah, we'll make a new fireworks document. So let's make this document the same size. So let's make it 320 by 320. Now you can use any graphic program, graphic manipulation program like GIMP if you want to. We'll make our background white just to make it easy for us in this particular case, and press OK. So there's our 320 by 320 screen, right? And I always want to kind of go down to this level so we can see what it is, right? I'll put a text object. So here's our text object. And we'll call it hello world. Hello, don't worry about this thing for a second. It's just white. So my hello world object is white. Let's make it black. All right, hello world, right? Now it looks pixelated because it's so big. I'm at 200% here, right? But if you notice, this is not a font. When it comes onto the stage, all right, of this hello world object, as an example, and if it comes into the middle of the stage, right, which is approximately right here, right, for the whole object, the top left corner is really what we're using to draw with. So usually, like I said, it'll come to the middle of the object like this. That's the middle, exact middle of where this thing starts off approximately, right? So what we want to do is change the focal point, or the rotation point, if you will, right, to the middle of this object, like in here, right? That's what we're doing when we change the registration values. So regx is this, the x value. How do I move the registration point from the top left corner to the right, right? So in this particular case, because my object in this case is, if you look at the width, is 166 pixels, right? This object that I made is 166 pixels, right? So the middle of this object would be what? 166 divided by 2, right? And that's where it is. It'd be somewhere in here, right? And then the height of the object is 45 pixels. So somewhere in between 45 pixels, right, 22.5 pixels, whatever it is, it's going to be down here somewhere, right? So that's where it's going to be. So the Y registration point goes this way, right down. So then I move this from the top left corner. It moves to the middle, and that's how I can rotate it from the middle. That's the rotation point, if you will, right? Let me show you what happens when I decide not to rotate it from the middle, but from the side. If I go back to our demonstration here, and if I say, for example, I've set is centered for our label in app.js, I've sent it to true. Let's make it false, right? So there it is. And if I go back to localhost to show you, oops, that's the wrong one. That's the wrong localhost. I go back there, you can see that now it rotates from the side, right? Right, this corner right here, right? Because that's what it would rotate like, hello world, right? Which makes no sense. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to rotate from the middle. But in order for me to get the rotation point to the middle, I have to move it with the registration values, right? Regx and reg-y, right? I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm just saying that's not what I wanted the effect to do for me, right? Okay, let's move this text around too. In that way, if that's true, right? Going back to here, and let's say I want to move it back to the middle, right? So here is true. Right, so I just saved it again, so you can see that it goes back to the middle now, right? But how do I make it rotate? Well, if you notice, I do the rotation inside the game loop function. Notice how this works again. I define a canvas object, right, by hooking into the canvas, just like we normally do. We've been doing this all semester. We create a reference to the canvas that we have on the page, right? That's the first thing. And then what I do is this stage object here, right, is actually just a container that contains everything else. I want you to think about this as the highest level container in our entire project for CreateJS, and it contains everything else. It's a container that gets put onto the stage, but everything inside the stage, if I add things to the stage, it just appears on the canvas. That's what happens, okay? And again, I've decided upon the frame rate, and then what I have is a special event for the ticker object to say every frame, so that's 60 times every second, I update my game loop. I hit my game loop. Well, if that's true, this thing here is what's happening. I'm rotating it 60 times per second, right? Every 5 degrees, every 60, 60 times every second. So, example, this is one thing I wanted to do. But what if I want this object to move down as well at the same time? Well, how would I do that? Down the page. How do I move it down the page? What do I put in? So hello label dot. Which one do I? What am I? If I say down the page, what am I? Which one is it? X or Y?
Y.
Y. Okay. Now down the page means what? What is it? Positive or negative Y? Wrong.
Plus minus?
Positive Y. It's positive Y, and the reason this is why people get it wrong, because if I go back to my object, remember the top left corner is 0, 0, to the right is positive X, to down is positive Y. Because I'm drawing it this way. I'm drawing it to the right and then down, right? If I go up the page, that's negative Y, right? That's where people get, because it's not Cartesian math. It's not like the bottom point down here is 0, 0. And you go up with positive Y and to the right with positive X. It's not like that. In computers, it's top left corner of the screen. Sorry? It's not that way, but it's just that the 0, 0 point for when we draw stuff with our computer is down. It's not down here on the left, bottom left. It's top left. Negative Y. Negative Y goes up. Positive Y goes down. Okay. So that's the thing. That's why I asked you, because people make a mistake, and it's not because you're you don't know what you're doing. In your mind, you just have to reverse it for Y, because we draw to the right and down. All right, it's very, very important. So if I go hello label and I want to move it down 1 pixel every frame, right? So I could do something like this, the hello label, and I'll say plus equals to 1. So I say I add 1. Plus equals means it's the shorthand again. Remember that says hello label dot y is equal to hello label dot y plus 1. That's what I'm saying, right? So if I do that now, if I do it, you can see that it slowly moves down the screen until it goes away, right? It's gone, and I'll never see it again. It'll keep going down forever. It'll keep adding one pixel to the location of my label until it disappears, right? I could put a range, right? But that means I have to check it. That means the way I have to do this is I say, okay, well, I'm going to increase my hello label to y by 1 every frame, but then I got to check to see if it reaches a certain place. How do I do that? Well, I got to say something like this: if, right? And I can also do this too. My hello label dot y, the plus equals to y 1. I could do that, and I can say, well, if my hello label, I'll check it first, right, is less than or equal to, right? Remember the size of the screen is 320 by 320, 320, right? And I don't want to just do this. I want to say the y is 320. If it's less than or equal to 320, then let's increase y, right? That's what I'm saying here. That's the only time it's going to go 320. So let's check this. So if it's less than or equal to 320, it's going to keep increasing y. Then it's going to stop at the bottom, right? Let's check. See? Let me just refresh that so you can see it. So it starts moving down until it gets to 320, and then it just stops. Okay, let's do this way. Now, if my hello label, right, dot y, once it equals to 320, right? So we'll do this way. So if it's less than 320, as an example, keep moving it down, right? If it's equal to 320, right? Greater than or equal to 320, because we want to check that one. So greater than or equal, because if we just put equal, just because of the cycles, it might go outside before we check, right? So if it's greater than or equal to 320, right, then we want to move the other way around, right? But that means that when it goes up here, then, so I'll show you what I'm talking about. Label.y minus equal to 1, right? But that problem is it's going to just go like this. At the bottom, it's just going to hover up and down, right? Because it's going to satisfy one condition, then go up and satisfy the other condition, and go back and satisfy this condition again, right? So it won't move anywhere. This isn't going to work, right? So, but this only works when this object, if you want to toggle it from one side to the other, right? So really, this is wrong. This methodology. This is a nice idea, Tom, but it's not what I want. It's the direction. What am I doing? Is it a negative or positive? And how do I set it? I want to check it on the borders. If I hit the bottom border, I go back up. If I hit the top border, I start going back down, right? And I set it up that I'm going down at the beginning, right? So I could put in a label direction if I wanted to move the label around. I mean, I could do it so that the label itself has a direction, or I can make it so it's some kind of variable that I keep track of. An example of that would be, label direction. I'll make this up, right? Which is a number, or which is I'll make it a number, right? And I'll make it so that the direction of the label setup is 1 by default. So I'm going to add 1, right? So if the label direction is 1, positive, right? And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to redo this. If, right, hello label dot y is greater than 0, as an example. Actually, if we hit the bottom, right? Once it hits greater than or equal to 320, then what we want to do is the label direction. Label direction is we're going to multiply it, right? Times equals to -1. Times equals is label direction is equal to label direction times -1. That's the times equals is just a shortcut for that. Times equals. Times equals, plus equals, minus equals. These are all shortcuts you should know from C#, from Java. They're all the same in every C-style language, right? All right, so if it hits the bottom border, it's going to go -1, right? Well, if I actually hit the top border, I should go times -1 too, right? Because if I go to the top and if it's already in a negative direction, multiply a negative by a negative becomes a positive. It goes down again. So I should always multiply by -1, right? So if that's true, if it's greater than or equal to 320, or if it's equal to 0, less than or equal to 0, right? One of the two. Those are two conditions. So or if hello label, right, dot y is less than or equal to 0, right? That's 0 is the top of the actual object, the stage. And I'm just going to put this in brackets. Then multiply it by -1, right? That's the label direction, right? And then at the bottom, we'll say hello label dot y plus equals to label direction. So that way, this will change depending on whether it's hitting the top or the bottom. Let's see what happens, right? And see if I'm right, right? Maybe I'm wrong. All right, so it's going back up the page, right? And then it's going to hit the top, and it's going to go back down the page. Okay? And it's going to hit the bottom. It's going to go back up the page. Sure. It's no problem. So if I'm going to go x, positive x. Now, if I do it, as an example, right now I'm making it so it's exactly the same path, back up and down. I'm making it go up and down, right? I could randomly set it too, right? Sure, I could. How fast it moves? Sure, yeah. Well, look, if I say, look, right now it's times equal to -1, right? So instead of -1, look, instead of -1, I could say that I'm going to multiply it by a range of numbers, right? So what's the range that I can make it? So I'm going to use random numbers, right? And let's say we make it a range, so we want to go as fast as 5 pixels per frame and as slow as 1 pixel per frame. So 1 to 5, right? How do I do that? So instead of this minus, we'll keep the minus in there, okay? But we'll surround the minus in a math function. So math.random, just because you're asking, right? And random, by the way, random numbers will be on your exam, right? Math.random multiplied by 5, right? We're going to also add 1 to it, right? So we're going to add 1 to this number. So let's just make it another bracket. Make another bracket, and we'll add 1 to the end, like this, right? Let's format everything so it looks nice. There we go. So math.random says a number between 0 and 1, right? And 0, and then every point between 0 and 1, every point, like, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, whatever, all these little points is going to generate randomly between 0 and 5, right? So it's never going to get to 5. It's going to be 4 point something, right? We add 1 to it, it's going to get to 5. And what we want to do here after this thing here is somehow get the math.floor. The floor means we're going to go to the nearest pixel. So I can do it here and add 1 to it, right? Which means I can do something like this, math.floor of math.random, right? And then add 1 to it at the end. So we're always going to get a solid pixel number, which makes more sense than if I just got some point pixel. Either I have a pixel or I don't, right? How do I add another pixel to it? So it's going to be more pixel by pixel. Let's do this again. So I'm going to Control A and then just format the code. There we go. So now my label direction is going to be a random number between 1 and 5, right? Is it going to be positive or negative? It's still going to be this different speed every time. Every time I hit the top or the bottom, the speed is going to change. Let's just see if this works. If I hit the top, right, and I hit the bottom, and then I hit the top, see it goes a little faster, and then I hit the bottom, and then I keep going, and uh-oh. That's not what I wanted. How come it did that? How come it went off screen like that, right? Because of my check. Because it got to the point where, it got to the point where it would fail like this, right? And the reason why it would fail, watch, because it compounds. It compounds. It's going to go crazy like that because it goes faster and faster, right? Because of my code. So I got to be careful. It's not what I wanted, right? So it goes faster and faster and faster, and then finally it just goes nuts, right? Why? Let's cancel that for a second. Because of my algorithm is wrong, right? What I'm saying here is multiply by this number, some random number again. That's not what I want. What I actually want here is the speed, and I want to multiply that by -1, not the number, right? The speed is going to be whatever the speed is. I'm just going to multiply it by -1, right? So let's make another variable, right? So I'll say variable label speed. And we'll set the label speed as a number, right? We'll make it to 1 at the beginning, set it as 1, right? And then what we'll say is, instead of doing it like this, we'll break it down into 2 parts, right? Label speed, right? We'll make this. Just for a second, I'll just copy this whole thing, and I'll just change it for a second. Here's my label speed. I don't want to make it negative, right? I can take away these brackets for a second. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. Right? And now my direction is going to change, right? So that's not going to change to anything different. So every time I go, I'm going to change my label speed, right? And then my direction, right, is going to be my -1, right? Times equal to -1. My label direction is going to be time equal to -1, right? Okay, that's what it was before. So how do I incorporate speed into that? I can't multiply it, right? I just want to take my speed and multiply it by -1, right? And then what I want to do down here is plus equal to speed, not direction anymore, right? So what I want to say is that instead of times equal, I'm going to say is equal to label speed, right, times -1, whatever the label speed is going to be, right? Okay, okay, but that means that I'm never going to bounce anymore, right? That's not going to work either, because what's going to happen is my label speed is going to be a positive number every time, because I'm setting it again every time I loop. I'm setting it to a positive number, which is wrong, right? So let's go back to the drawing board. So times equal to -1. And down in here, where I plus equal to, right, this is where it's going to be a little equal. I want to say, hey, I'm going to add whatever my label direction is, -1, times my speed, right? So it's going to be just positive, negative speed, right? So we do it like this. We'll say label direction, right, is going to be in brackets, right, and then times my speed, which is going to always be a labeled speed, which is going to be a number between 1 and 5. So if my label direction is positive, I'm going to positive 1 and 5. If my label direction is negative, it's going to be negative 1 to 5, right? And that way it won't kind of add to itself, right? Let's see if that's right. And let's go back and just go to that location again. So localhost. Let's see if it works now. It doesn't go crazy. And so bam, it hits the top. It goes a little faster, or the same speed, or whatever. Hits the top now. Goes a little bit bigger, but then it goes slower again, right? So that's not going to go crazy anymore. It's going to be different speeds every time, right? It won't multiply. Well, it won't multiply randomly like that anymore. What it'll do is it'll give me a random speed, right? But the multiplier just changes it to change the direction, positive or negative. That's all it does.
How fast is it? Up to 5 pixels?
1 to 5 per frame, because I mean, and each frame happens every 60 milliseconds. So 60 frames per second, it gives me a speed. How many pixels is going to move down the screen, right? We have 320 pixels to move, right? If I set the pixel speed to 5 pixels per frame, right? 5 times 60 is 300 pixels in a second. That's what it is, right? Because 5 pixels is the maximum frame rate, right? So I can go the whole thing in 1 second. Now, if that's too slow for you, why is it stuck? Because, there we go. Because it was negative or equal to 0, and it was beyond that point, right? And that's why. That we did, yeah. We have to find what that is, right? That number was, it was just because I'm saying less than or equal to 0, right? Or it could be one of those things, or it could be a number that was too negative, right?
What if it's a point number, like 0.5?
Well, if you want to see what it is, if you want to see what this is, you want to see what the thing is, let's make a label on the bottom, right? To show what the speed is going to be of this object, okay? So just to show you the speed and the direction, okay? So how do I do that? So I'm going to go to index.html, right? And here's my canvas. We're not going to do it in the canvas. That doesn't make any sense. But we'll do it inside here, inside this area here, right? We'll, underneath the canvas, we'll put another div tag, right? With an ID of, and we'll say, well, should I do in the div tag, or should I do it in a paragraph tag? We'll do it in a paragraph tag. So paragraph tag with an ID of direction, right? So we'll say label direction. Let's keep it the same. We'll do a paragraph tag with an ID of label speed. Okay. So those are the two IDs. So that's where we're going to put our stuff in there. Okay. Just to satisfy your curiosity, right? So that's cool. So that means in here we have to make some hooks for those, which we will. So we'll say something like, now we have to be careful because we've named them label direction, label speed, right? We'll make it so that it's something else. So we'll say variable LBL, let's use LBL direction, right, is equal to document.getElement by ID. That's an example, and it'll be label direction. So it's something else. We named it something else, right? And then variable label speed is equal to document.getElement by ID, and then label speed. There we go. Okay, there we go. So now we have hooks into my HTML. And now that we have hooks into the HTML, we can assign those values every time we change, right? So we say, when we assign label direction or speed, then we'll have that in there. So we'll say, we'll do it at the bottom. We'll do both at the bottom. So we'll say, label direction, right, or speed. Let's do speed first, right? Label speed dot inner text, right, is equal to label speed. And then we'll talk about this in a second. So how come it's giving me this issue? It says the number is not assignable to type string, right? Because we have to do this, we have to change this into a string. How do I convert it to a string? Because I'm getting a number and I want to put it back onto the screen, right? Huh? I could parse, right? How about if I do toString? Is that possible too? Does this thing have a toString value? Can I do that? The same. Maybe we can, right? Let's see if that happens. That's one. And the other one is I want to do label direction, right, is equal to label direction, which one called label direction, right, toString. And how come that didn't work? How about inner text, Tom? Right, not HTML, right? Inner text, because that won't work. Okay, cool. So save that, and you can see that nothing comes out. How come? Oh, there we are. So it's negative, meaning it goes up, right? And then it's positive, it goes down by 4. And then it's negative by 5. And then it's positive by 2, right? Negative by 5 and positive by 1. Right? You can see what's happening here, right? Negative by 5, positive by 4. Negative by 3, positive by 5. Negative by 3, positive. Uh-oh. See what happened there? It got stuck, and it was trying to do, you know, change the direction. And so one of these two options, okay. So let's see what the location is, because depending on the reason why it's doing that is because of the speed of the object. It's outside the bounds, right? And then it's getting back into the bounds. I'll tell you why it's happening, right? No, what's happening, the reason why this is happening is because it's trying to put it back inside the bounds, right? It's our conditional statements. Let's just go back to the conditions we made, right? The reason why it's happening is this, right? And okay, I'll make another one for you guys to see. So let's call this, so we'll say our label, not our label location, and we'll do it from the Y perspective, label Y. We'll call it label Y, and we'll call it label Y. No, we'll do the same thing, label Y, because otherwise we're going to do something. It's document, we don't have this yet, document.getElement by ID, and then we'll call it to label Y, like that. We don't have a label Y yet, but we'll add it in, right? So if I go back to my index.html, and then underneath here, we'll put in the Y coordinate. What's the Y of the label? So P ID is equal to label Y, is what I'm really doing here. And there we go. So label Y will be the actual position of the label in the Y coordinate space. Okay, let's check out and see what happens now when we run it. So we'll go to localhost, and then let's see what happens. So once we hit this, we're going to get our first coordinates. Oh, how come we're not getting it? Because I'm not transmitting anything there. Hold on a second. That's why. So every time we do this change, what I want to do is every frame where when we do a switch, right? Actually, I just transmitted every frame. Okay, so we'll say label Y inner text is equal to, and we'll do the same thing with the other ones. We'll do it outside of the if statement this time, right? Is equal to our label Y. And did we define label Y here? Oh, did we? We did not. Our label Y is a number that we're going to equal to. We're not going to give it an assignment because it's going to be equal to our object, right? Actually, we don't have to do that. That's why we don't. That's why I didn't assign it. La la la. Because we're going to get it from the Y coordinate of the label. Sorry. Hello label dot Y dot toString. Right? We're going to get the inner HTML here, and you know what? Might as well pull these out here too, because they have values, right? So we'll pull them out so that they are out here, so we'll always get them, except for instead of just waiting for us to get them later on. Okay, so this is every frame we're going to get a report of the speed, direction, and location of the label. Okay, there we go. All right. You can see how that's increasing. It's hitting the 320 and going back, right? Now it's going back up, until it hits the top. Then it goes back down. And we'll see if we can get that problem again. So it's 1 and 1. So it's positive direction, and then negative, and then positive, and then it's going to go back up. I'm surprised it doesn't got caught in the bottom yet. We'll see. All right, so 1 and 1, and then 1 and 5. Here's, that's the chance when it's really fast. What was that? The way you could do it is if it depends on how realistic you want to be is the answer.
Maybe you fixed it.
No. I didn't change the condition. The condition is causing the issue, not the numbers.
But did you move the condition?
No. You'll see. It's gonna error out again. It's gonna take time this time around. But the idea here is just so while we're waiting, instead of watching this it's like watching paint peel here to make sure we're, oh, there it is. Okay, look at the number. Right? Okay, so why did this happen? So when it goes negative, right? Because it goes so fast, it goes outside the bounds, right? So let's go down to this. Let's do this. So the condition is wrong, right? So I'm saying, well, if hello label is less than or equal to 0, right? Less than or equal to 0, then get a random number and multiply it by -1. Well, guess what? If I'm less than or equal to 0, less than or equal to, right? That means that there's a problem. Because if I'm negative, I'm always going to be, this condition is always going to be true once I hit the negative numbers, right? It's always going to be true because I'm beyond. Same thing here. If I go beyond 320, right? So let's make another thing. Another condition statement. So I split these conditions up. Actually, I just copy this line for a second, a couple times. So if, here's what I want to really do, right? I want to stop it from happening altogether, right? And how do I stop it from happening, right? So if it's greater than or equal to 320, right, then I want to make it equal to 320, right? That means it's going to stop at 320, right? That's the first part. So let's get rid of that one. So if it's this one, we'll do the first condition and see if this saves us, right? So if it's greater than or equal to 320, I want to make it a low label. I want to set it to 320. So it can never go beyond, right? Likewise, if it's less than or equal to 0, right, then we'll make it equal to 0. Hello label, right? It's equal to 0, right? Dot y. Right now, those are two. So this basically what this does is sets the bounds of the upper bound. This is the lower bound. The lower bound of the label, right? And this sets the upper bound. Sets the upper bound. Okay, so you can't go beyond, right? This one checks to see if, for whatever reason, now we never have to check greater than or equal to. All we have to say is equal to now. If it's equal to 320, then we do one thing, or if it's equal to 0, one of those two conditions. If it's one or the other, right, which is going to happen either one or the other. We're making this happen for sure, right? We're ensuring that this is going to happen, right? Depending on what it is, we're going to set the location at random number, or the speed and the direction as a random. Now it's never going to happen again. So we think. Right, let's see if that happens. So again, we'll go back here. Label. See, my mind is all labels. Local source. All right, so now it goes down to the bottom, and then it goes back up to the top, right? No, because it'll be set to 0 or 320. It'll be a standard number, right? Same. So you can see how it's not going to error out anymore, right? Okay, lots of checks though. These are a lot of checks, for this stuff, right? And what we check a bigger number, because bigger numbers are the ones that make us have more errors, right? So we've just checked 1 to 5. Let's do 1 to 50, right? To see how fast it really goes, okay? Just to make it go crazy, because that's the place where we can really check it. So this is how we really check it. We'll make it 1 to 50 per frame. Really fast. So watch what happens now. So as soon as it hits the bottom, you're going to get a number that's going to do it. That's going to be crazy. But see how it never kind of stops it from going out. And this is the test, right? Depending on what it is, it's going to make it go up really, really fast, right? But no, that's rare. 1, right? Right? You can make it go as crazy as you want. Yeah.
So how do you want this banner to be
Well, what I want you to do is what I've asked to do, which is I want you to have some kind of text that shows that what you're what you're advertising your project. So it has something to be related to the project, and it's got to be clickable. well, no, not the text, but the image of the text. If you follow the example, I'll go through it in a second, but you see how it's not going to error out anymore? Doesn't matter what happens. No matter how fast it is, it's never going to error out anymore, right? And just to give you an idea, just before we stop recording, you said, what about if we want to do it so that it goes left and right too? So random location anywhere, right? So that means now because right now my x direction is always 0. I don't add x to it. So I can add x at a random number, but then I have to have my checks to see if my x is outside of the bounds, the right bound, the left bound, right? Correct. Okay, so let's check this out. So if my hello label.y is greater than or equal to 320, right? Well, I want to do the same thing with my my other one, my x coordinate. So I'm going to kind of copy this whole piece there, right? And I'll do, instead of y, we'll go x. Now you see there's duplication. So this is the, if the 320, this is the right bound. Right bound. Rightmost. We'll say the rightmost bound. Right? And then the same thing goes with this one. If I go to this one, again, is there a way of breaking this down so that you can make it more different? And we're doing all in the game loop. Should I do it all in the game loop? Or maybe I should have a method that does all this, which might be the better way. Because it clutters my game loop. I don't want this to be here, right? So in here, this is the left bound, leftmost bound of the label, and we're going to say this is x. Right? So x is less than or equal to 0, then x equal to 0, you know, kind of thing. So we're going to figure out the leftmost and the rightmost bounds, the top and the bottom. This is what handles the entire, sets the bounds. And now, right, if it's the other way around, right, we're going to say, we're going to add, just like how the rotation is 5, right? What I want to do is, this is the direction, and this is we have to change these. Let's just get rid of these now, so we don't need these anymore. This is just for testing. And we'll do the same thing for this stuff here. We don't care about the stuff on the index page. So these are just for testing. So we know how to do it now, right? So we have label speed, but this isn't incorrect. The label speed is only for the y direction. So we want to have label for x and for y, right? What's our label speed for our x and y, right? So what we really want to say is, what's our change in y? What's our change in y, right? So, I'm going to change this, rename the symbol, and we'll call this dy, change in y. That's what the d in math, change in y. Yeah, the delta, right? And we'll do the same thing. We'll do the same thing for dx. So dx is equal to a number, which we're going to set to 1. So delta x and delta y. Right, and you can see how delta y, we can get rid of this. We can see how we've handled delta y. Now we're going to do the same thing with the x coordinate, right? And we need a label direction, but this label direction is no good. This is just the direction for y, right? So we'll call this, rename it. We'll rename the symbol to y direction, right? And now we'll copy it, and we'll say x direction number is equal to 1, right? Because that's what we're going to say, because it's a positive number. And we'll make it bounce all over the place, right? Randomly. Watch. Wait, one thing at a time, right? So now this will be the same thing. We'll say hello label dot x is plus equal to the x direction, right, times dy, dx, right? And then we have to take this little thing, this little guy here, and rejig it for the x. Now look at all the duplication we're doing. Lots of duplication, which means we can make a method that does all this and half the code, right, in a second, right? We'll see it. Just bear with me. We'll do one. First, we make the big fat code. That's what we should do always. Make big fat code that works, right? And then crunch it down so that it's small code that works even better, right? So now we're going to be the same thing. If the y hello label.x is equal to 320, right? We want to change this to dx and the x direction, right, as an example. And then this is the y plus x. Still the random number. This is too big, so let's make it back to 5. right? Just so that way you can see that how it's working, right? Whew. Okay, a lot of duplication here, lots and lots of duplication, right? And we're going to fix this, but one thing at a time, like we said. So everything is double the statements, right? And we go back to here, and let's see how it can blow up, right? Let's see if it blows up. All right, so we have a random direction, goes to the right, and now it's going to go to the left, and now it's going to go down, and now it's going to go to the left, and now it's going to hit that one, and it's going to bounce all over the place, right? Until it goes forever, and it's going to be random. Now, sometimes it might get stuck, right? Well, let's see if it does, right? I took it off. Yeah, because there's too many numbers. I would have to put more stuff in there to make it work. But you can see how now it's going to go all over the place. It's never going to spin out of control because I set the bounds properly. All right, let's take a short break, and when I come back, we'll make a better method than that crazy stuff we duplicated over and over again. We'll make it so that we have one small, beautiful method that's part of the label class, right, that we're going to write, right? Because each label, if we want our label to perform this way, and let's say I want to apply this to more than this label. Let's say I have other text I want to have randomly on the screen as well, right? How do I do that, right? If this is what I'm going to do, and as you can see, it just looks like it's random, but actually what's happening is I'm limiting the bounds, so it can never slip outside the bounds, ever. I don't know, sometimes.
Okay, why is it rotating?
Because I made it rotate.
Oh, you made it rotate. But it wasn't just hitting the sides, it was going in circular form.
Well, it's rotating. The rotation speed is never different. The rotation speed is always the same. Right? If you notice, always to the right. And one of your labs was to make the rotation speed the other way. Go to the left, the other way. Rotate to the to the negative, right? So let's pause here, and when I come back, we'll fix this thing up.